Once a young man was passing by a group of soldiers. They asked him the password. His response, Cristero, Christ the King. Their reaction, they cut off his ear with their sword. After this, he said, Viva Cristero, long live Christ the King. Their reaction, they cut off his tongue. When he was going to again proclaim the holy name, they stabbed him to death. Now, this episode seems as if it could have taken place, say, in the early centuries of the church in Rome. But as a matter of fact, it took place in a time much closer to our own. It took place in the 20th century. It was in Mexico in the 1920s that this took place. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. Mexico is kind of our forgotten neighbor to the south. But the civilization that was achieved there far surpassed what was in the United States, at least until 1800. By 1821, 11,800 cathedrals, churches, and chapels were built, many of them masterpieces. The years 1550 to 1650 probably saw one of the greatest outbursts of artistic creativity in the history of the world in any one country. The first university in North America was founded in 1553 in Mexico City. Cambridge came nearly 100 years later. The first college was founded in 1523 in Mexico City. And what's even more impressive is the fact that the professors of these universities were not Spaniards. They were native Mexicans. Joining with me today on What Catholics Believe to discuss the Cristeros are Father Clarence Kelly, Spiritual Director of St. Joseph's Novitiate in Round Top, New York, Mr. Jose Lupe Atilano, a parishioner of Father Marachka's at St. Anne Church in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio. You know, it's the accomplishments of Mexico when it was called the New Spain, the remarkable culture it achieved, the thriving economy, started to go down. Or first, they're basically not recognized, and people are not aware of the accomplishments. And they started to lose ground after Mexico gained independence from Spain, when socialist and Masonic elements grabbed control of the government. What's generally not known is, although the country is 97% Catholic, to this day it is against the law for a priest to wear a Roman collar in public. This happened as a result of the Constitution of 1917 after the Mexican Revolution. But a period of history which is generally swept under the rug is that whole period, 1917, 1935, when perhaps among the greatest persecutions was launched against the church that anywhere. Heroic martyrs were found, and what's remarkable is no one is aware of this. Americans are not aware of this, and even Mexicans are not aware of this. Lupe, maybe perhaps you could tell us about what conditions were like, say, in the 1920s. What kind of restrictions were faced on Mexican Catholics?
Well, we have here from the early 20s, very several restrictions were applied to the church. But the most disastrous restrictions became in 1926, when the government of the President Calles decided to shut down the church and to imprison and put to death anyone who would be in his way. As a result, many souls died.
I understand that there was just an incredible anti-Catholic fury amongst these government officials. One named one of his children Lenin and the other Lucifer. There was anti-religious art everywhere. I understand that at one point it was forbidden to say Mass, even in a private home. And if anyone was identified by their neighbor as even praying at home, that home would be confiscated. there was murders of priests and nuns. The government would restrict the number of priests that were allowed to serve so many faithful. At some point, it was one priest for 100,000 people in certain areas. And I mean, to our ears, this sounds incredible that something like this could happen in the 20th century. But tell us about what was the reaction of the Mexican people to the murders of priests, to the abuse of religion? What happened?
Okay, I recently, I'm going to tell you first, Julius, recently I visited living Cristero today, Mr. De Anda. He's a person in his early 80s or late 70s, and he was involved for the cause. He told me many things that I myself really was astonished to find out what happened right there.
This is the gentleman right on the screen now, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a picture of you with him interviewing him?
Yes. This is him. It was, like I said, recently, it was a couple months ago of August 1991 when I went and talked to him, and I say, Mr. De Anda, tell me what happened there. He says, so the government decided just to close the church and to outlaw any kind of religion. And you don't have to be a clergy member to be persecuted for that. You have to be as Catholic and say that you believe in God, or find any evidence that you practice religion, and you either go to jail or your property would get confiscated or even put to death.
What then happened with this pressure that was being forced upon the people? Did they attempt to resist in any way? Because, mind you, of course, this country is 97% Catholic, and yet this happened.
Yes, the people respond very positive after they saw the most precious gift that they received in life was taken away. Lay people organized among themselves and went to rescue of the church.
What is that most precious gift you mean?
Well, the religion, our Catholic faith.
I was amazed to read about the devotion of of the Mexicans. One priest wrote a book called Mexican Martyrdom, and they would have all-night adoration with thousands of people in the cathedral being there all night, with the bishop leading them all night. It wasn't like they were in for 15 minutes or 1 hour. They were literally there all night long. In terms of this armed rebellion, I've read of many just incredible martyrdoms where people died very heroic deaths. Government troops would come and say, trying to find a priest, where is he? They wouldn't say, so they'd cut off their tongue, or they'd torture them first, and then their response would be, "Long live Christ the King," and then they'd cut off their tongue for saying something like this. I mean, in one instance, there was a young man who was being hung for being a Catholic and for defending the faith, and what he did is, with his last breath, he loosened the noose with one free hand as much as he could, and he let out a cry, "Long live Christ the King." And I mean, this is this kind of a heroism that one hasn't read about probably since the Roman persecutions. But at any rate, what then happened? Did these people take up arms to start defending themselves?
Well, what happened to them?
Right. How did this opposition manifest itself?
How did the people respond to this terrible persecution?
Well, people went organized on their own, pick up arms, and went to oppose the enemy, the government. Mm-hmm. And originally, I was told that a group of 40 Cristeros started this opposition against these atrocities. Mm-hmm. And eventually, there were thousands.
Could you explain that name so that people would understand Cristeros?
Cristeros means a Catholic person defending the faith.
Coming from the name of Christ our Lord.
Correct.
I see.
Mm-hmm. How did they operate?
Well, they will tell you they didn't have much professional training. There were common people, Catholic people that when they saw the religion being taken away, they would organize themselves. Apparently there were a few key people who would name the leaders. For instance, we have Mr. 14, Victoriano 14. He was a great hero. We have Mr. Hernandez, a former government official who sometime before he stepped down from his government position, and seeing the need of his input in this, he was one of the leaders, and he would organize and take the hills and fight from there.
Mm-hmm. So the people actually left their homes and they went and hid in the hills? Is that
yes. Yes, and then the families, they were left to the mercy of God there. Many of these people were swept, put in certain concentration places by the government, so the government won't think that they are a threat, that these people are a threat for them. While these, some of the Catholic men would defend the faith on the fields.
I was told, too, that Pope Pius XI gave a special dispensation to the Mexicans that they were allowed to keep the Blessed Sacrament in their homes or special hiding places and administer communion to themselves. And because what happened is, as a result of this, the church said they would not use the church buildings anymore because of this persecution. And the people would, you know, surreptitiously inform one another that at 8 o'clock tonight or at 3 in the morning at so-and-so's home there will be communion or there will be mass, and a priest would be disguised as a, you know, say a street sweeper or anything, and then he would sneak in. And it's amazing the ingenuity that that some of the priests exhibited in trying to hide from the government. If we have a shot here of Father Pro, Father Miguel Pro was a martyr who was shot to death, and we have a picture, if we may have it. This is a picture of Father Pro right before he was executed for being a Catholic priest. And he went to his death cheerfully, and also he reminded one of St. Athanasius in the way that he escaped the Masonic government. One time he was disguised, and he was about to go into a home with boldness to offer Mass, and the government soldiers were outside the home, and they said, "Have you seen Father Pro?" And he said, "Well, he must be here very close," you know, or something to that effect.
I think what should be added, too, is that most American people do not understand the role of Freemasonry. Most people think that Freemasonry is simply a kind of social institution where people perform works of charity. But if they knew the history of Freemasonry, it's just like the history of communism or of Nazism. Mm-hmm. The Freemasons in Europe especially were largely and primarily responsible for the growth of communism, and the Freemasons have persecuted with the most unbelievable bloody persecutions the Catholic Church in France, for example, and of course in Mexico here. And most American people don't think that. They think of their neighbor who is a Freemason, but they don't really understand what is behind this satanic-like conspiracy that has caused so much blood to flow.
There's no doubt that the Grand Orient of France was heavily involved in the Mexican events. And in fact, the Mexican president, Portes Gil, was a Mason, and here's what he had to say. He was, in fact, the one who signed the, we'll get to this later, the agreement with the church, which allowed a temporary liberty in 1929. He said, "The president at the time, Emilio Portes Gil, celebrated the Vatican-contrived surrender in a speech to fellow lodge members gathered for the annual banquet to mark the summer equinox. Here's what he said: 'Dear brothers, we can now confirm the fact that the clergy has come to a full recognition of the law. In Mexico, for many years now, the state and Freemasonry have been the same thing, entities marching step in step. The struggle is not new. It began 20 centuries ago with the birth of Christ, and it will go on until the end of time,' end quote." You're watching What Catholics Believe. We're discussing the Cristeros. You know, Reverend Fathers and Mr. Attilano, The role of the U.S. government in these episodes was remarkable because we see Samuel Gompers, who was a Mason and a member of the American Federation of Labor, turning up in Mexico and talking about a Masonic pipeline that fed information to Woodrow Wilson. We see a gentleman by the name of Bronstein, who was involved with the Constitution of 1917. Later he was known as Leon Trotsky, famous man in the Russian Revolution. What's interesting is that in spite of these tremendous anti-religious laws that were in effect, the United States did not withdraw its recognition from the Mexican government. What's more, the U.S. ambassador, Dwight Morrow, during that period made it very clear that the U.S. would not move to undermine the existing government, very much like President Eisenhower's declaration during the Hungarian Revolution that the U.S. looks with disfavor upon nations hostile to the Soviet Union, or even like President Bush saying that the stability of the Soviet Union is in our best interests. Could you comment about this, Reverend Fathers, perhaps, this effort of the U.S. government to seal off Mexico and, in fact, to set up border patrols to ensure that no arms would come through?
I'm certainly no expert on that period of history, but I think we just have to face the fact that Freemasonry has a tremendous influence in the United States of America. And the people who are in the upper positions in Freemasonry cannot possibly be ignorant of its true nature. Mm-hmm. And I would venture to say that the powerful influences of international Freemasonry certainly would have their influences in the United States government. I would like to know, though, if the people in Mexico at the time of the revolution understood who the enemy was. Did they understand that the socialists and the Masons in the government were the ones responsible for this terrible persecution of the church?
I don't think the people understood who the enemy was. They knew there was a great danger, that they were the victims there, but I don't really know, I really think that they didn't know who the enemy was, and it was the more hard thing.
Right. When they saw, for example, the unbelievable hatred mm-hmm. for Jesus Christ and the almost incomprehensible persecution of the Church of our Lord, the Catholic Church.
Yes.
What did they think? Did they think that these were insane men or agents of the devil, or?
Well, they thought that, I mean, they knew who the enemy was, the immediate enemy, which was the pro-communist government of Mexico. But the people themselves, I came to the conclusion by doing some readings that the enemy didn't end up there. There were hidden forces
behind the government.
Behind the government.
But the people did not know that at the time, is that
correct?
Right? Mm-hmm. Mr. De Anda, is that the gentleman's name?
Mr. De Anda, yes.
He actually carried a rifle.
Yes.
And he bore arms against this persecution of the people.
Yes.
It was a case of the government actually attacking the population of the country.
Correct.
To eradicate the Catholic faith.
Correct. Right. For 3 years, this gentleman defend the Catholic faith, put his life on the line just about every day.
Where was he living while he was doing this during the 3 years?
He was, well, he spent most of his time up in the hills. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, the people, the families, they knew what was going on. And these Cristeros were always on the run. Because they have small resources as far as arms and training, but yet they had a lot of assistance from the people, from the lay people, the common people.
Something, the Joan of Arc League, where these women would get right. munitions for them
right.
and so forth.
There's a lot of women that would spend their time, dedicate their time manufacturing ammunition, homemade. And they would all of a sudden, these Cristeros will arrive at homes just to pick up some food or something and get back to the hills, or to pass the information that there's the enemy is approaching.
And they had rosaries in their hands all this time.
I should say this, I feel proud that my mother's father, my grandfather, support this cause for the Catholic. He defended the Catholic directly, because at night, these Cristeros would come and get supplies from him. And he was put in danger many times, but he didn't care because he knew that this was worth it. And the most wonderful thing is that my mother tells me this, that every time they would arrive, this person with his group, they were always carrying the rosary in their hand, praying to our Blessed Mother for protection.
You know, just to give our viewers a feel for this insane hatred of the church in Mexico, I'd like to quote from the oath that school teachers were forced to take. In the presence of the Federal Board of Education, it began, I declare that I unconditionally accept the program of the socialistic school and that I will make it known and I will defend it. I declare that I am an atheist, an irreconcilable enemy of the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion, that I will endeavor to destroy it, detaching consciences from the bonds of any religious worship, and that I am ready to fight against the clergy anywhere and whenever it will be necessary. Just incredible that this was the kind of pledge that was required.
Lupe, the government actually tried to seize control of all education and take any education out of the hands of the church. Is that
correct? As a matter of fact, they did. They outlawed any Catholic schools, any Catholic worship, places where discovered that Catholic teaching was taught. They would confiscate these properties, and they would send the owner of this property to jail. It was disastrous.
I read somewhere that one of their first measures when the government took over the schools was to introduce sex education. Is that true?
Correct.
Why would they do that? Was it to corrupt the children? Or?
Exactly. Okay, right now in these days, 1991, I'm concerned what's going on with in the government schools as far as sex education, and I thought this is bad. Well, when I found out what kind of methods they were using to teach sex education at those times, I mean, I became horrified. Their methods consist of the teacher ordering all the children, I'm talking second, third, and fourth grader children, elementary grades, to strip their clothes off. And this was their method. Okay, one little girl, she had the courage to go home and tell her father what this teacher did to them. This courageous father came very, very angry and looked for the teacher and says, Mrs. So-and-so, I want to tell you that my daughter doesn't take her garments in front of nobody except her mother. And what you did is
outrage.
A very, very, very big offense. But science is you teaching. I commend you to strip yourself. I don't think she did. I think he carried out. But he was just pointed out.
I think he pulled a revolver out and she fainted from terror. In fact, I recall Father Parsons mentions a similar episode where this one woman was so notorious in using these kind of methods to corrupt these children that she came to be known as the Gate of Hell. So one time, some group of vigilantes, they said that if you don't stop this, we're going to do something about it. And so her reaction was to tell the federal government right away, and she kept on. Well, what they did is one day they caught her with a lasso and dragged her behind a car for about 2 kilometers and just left her there. And the interesting thing is that teachers, after these kind of episodes, stopped doing it, but it had to come from the parents. One time, one mother, after she found out what her child went through, what an assault on our purity, came with a revolver. She lost her mind and shot the teacher dead on the spot as a result of this. But it was just incredible. You know, the other thing that to me was remarkable is that this whole episode of the Cristeros was very much hushed up. But it seems that by 1929, they were on the verge of causing the Calles regime very, very serious problems. And maybe you can comment on that, because here in one book, it was interesting, the Archbishop Diaz was in New York, and Father Parson says this, that he felt that it came home to him, said that to overthrow the Mexican government involved something vastly harder than victory in the field over some Mexican armies. It would be necessary to first to coerce the American government. After Dwight Morrow, our ambassador, made it clearly understood that he would not even consider any solution that meant a change of regime in Mexico, this suspicion became a conviction. And then he thought as soon as the Cristeros became really dangerous to Caius, help would come to him to preserve him in power, as actually happened in 1929. My understanding is that one of the youths, Garcia, I can't remember his last name, went to America and solicited contributions. What happened is, I believe the Vatican Secretary of State, Gaspari, told the bishops not to help him. Okay. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We'd love to continue this discussion, and we will. But I'd like to remind you that we're here only